Europe is amazing.
US are full-on American. Yes. US headquartered. Yes.
We're in violent agreement that we need more competition.
Now it's time to just move. Just move.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this second session of the Paris Cyber Summit. So we are here talking about global tech, local rules, economics, and zero trust market in a connected world. So my name is Clotilde Bômont. I'm a senior policy analyst at the European Union Institute for Security Studies, and I have the pleasure of moderating this roundtable. So I would like to start emphasizing the last part of the title, which is a connected world, because this connected world we live in is also a world where we voluntarily all build dependency through globalization mechanisms. And for many years, we tended to assume that interdependence was a source of stability. But the more links we created between countries, sectors, infrastructures, societies, the less states would have an interest in conflict. But the evolution of the geopolitical environment has challenged this assumption, and this is, I think, something we'll discuss today. And we've seen that digital technologies have become part of a wider geopolitical power relations. So this also means that the digital economy is no longer about value creation only, efficiency or innovation. It is increasingly about strategic positioning, control over critical infrastructures, access to data, regulatory influence, and the ability to define the conditions under which technologies are developed, deployed, and trusted. So this brings us to the question of trust, which is in the title as well, because trust is essential between a technology provider and a user, whether that user is a citizen, a company, a public administration, or a state. So users need to know that their data will remain secure, that confidentiality, integrity, and availability will be protected. But trust today goes beyond cybersecurity in the narrow sense, and it is also about transparency, accountability, compliance, values, jurisdiction, and the political environment in which a technology provider operates. And at the same time, the digital technologies still have a global footprint. Data flows across borders, supply chains are transnational, innovation ecosystems are interconnected, and companies operate across jurisdictions. So the question is, how can regional and national regulatory frameworks be upheld and respected without fragmenting the digital space, economically, technologically, or politically? And how do different governance and regulatory approaches affect economic efficiency, innovation, competition, and market dynamics? What trade-offs do they create for industry, policymakers, and users? And in the specific case of the transatlantic relationship, how can we reconcile this apparent dichotomy between global tech and local rules? Where are the gaps, the blind spots, and the sources of friction? And conversely, where are the strengths, the points of convergence, and the opportunities for alignment? So to explore these questions, I have the pleasure of welcoming Mrs. Alison King. You are Vice President of Government Affairs for Forescout Technologies. We also have here today Mrs. Cristina Caffarra. You are founding member of Eurostack, Economist, and specialist in competition regulation of digital platforms. And finally, but not least, Mustafa Isik. You are Chief Technology Officer for AWS European Sovereign Cloud. So, sorry. So let me start with you, Alison, if you don't mind. It seems that the concept of zero trust is increasingly moving beyond architecture and technical system. So it now extends into business relationships and market governance models, operating on the assumption of risk by default, including non-technological risks. So this is reflected in regulatory approaches seen across many regions globally. And Europe is often described as the world's primary digital regulator, and yet, contrary to common perception, it is not alone in this direction, and frameworks such as FISMA, FedRAMP, or the CMMC in the United States introduce similarly stringent and structured obligations for technology and cybersecurity providers. So in that light, are we truly seeing a divergence in how much regulation exists across the Atlantic, or are we instead looking at different models for governing the same underlying tensions between global technology and local control? And if these are indeed different models, what fundamentally distinguishes how they function in practice? And if I can even push it a bit further, would you say that this zero trust inspired governance approach to markets is necessary to mitigate risks? Or should we instead focus primarily on technical controls, avoiding regulatory mechanisms that may constrain innovation and market development? Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with all you this morning. That is like the most loaded question I've ever heard, but you know, we will dive into different pieces of that as well. And so just a little bit about Forescout to help kind of set the stage here. We're a 25-year-old company. We see ourselves more as a national security partner and not just a tech vendor. And so what does that mean? That means that where I sit in Washington, D.C., I'm part of the larger revenue team, but I see myself as like special teams to try and help them engage with policymakers and also continue to support our customers in the United States. Our federal customers, there's over 70 of them, and so that's taken a really long time to build that trust and to be able to navigate the sales timelines associated with that because they are long and they are complicated. And so from that perspective, being able to tackle this problem as well, there is an understanding, or at least for us, that we do like from time to time, like to pick on the Europeans for what they have put into place to be able to enter their market. But in the United States, to your point, it's not just CMMC or FISMA for government and others, but even federal incident reporting, because CERSEA is behind in the United States to do a final rulemaking. And so it's just interesting because even with CERSEA and Congress coming in and saying, you shall do this, now kind of figure out a final rule, CISA, before that there were 52 different competing federal incident reporting requirements on the books. And so there's considerable overlap there. And that's just at the federal level. You can then kind of like dig down into a state level. And so we have a huge amount of fragmentation. And what drives me crazy in the United States is we're like, how do we harmonize? Well, I don't even like that word. I think it's like a verb that doesn't mean anything. It's kind of admiring this problem that we acknowledge that there is an issue, but we will not move towards streamlining. We will not move towards reciprocity or common intake form or common definitions, common timelines. And so there's a tremendous amount of work that still needs to happen to move forward, because what happens from an operational perspective is that I have to then advise folks to spend more money on their lawyers and not on their workforce, not buying better tools. And so the burden of complying supersedes any security ROI that you would have moving forward. And so it's just not where we want it to be. And so even looking at Europe, and again, like we continue to kind of have this level of, I think, healthy debate. I think it's really important. But even within the United States, like we still have very much the similar issue. I think it's just kind of like more in vogue to be able from like a state to state, but European market, 27 states, to be able to say, well, I want less rules. It's like, no, I want there to be an easier way, clear-based rules that will demonstratively improve resilience and raise our baseline collectively, because there is no borders in which we have to deal with a lot of these threats, especially these LLMs that will be weaponized. It's going to challenge everything. It's going to challenge your tech debt that you have. It's a margin call on your tech debt, whether you know things are there that you haven't patched or you just can't patch them at all, but also the time around your architecture. You will not have time to be able to ponder these things, to think that you have an advantage over the fallout that will come in contact with your systems, your ability to provide services. And so I think that it's important now to kind of get over the initial, heartburn around, well, how do we frame this? How do we call this? But also understand that we need to, in fact, figure out opportunities to be responsible and to move faster, but also respect the rules and laws of the different areas in which we like to do business.
Thank you very much, Alison. And maybe moving to Mustafa. So now we operate in a world where technology remains global, yet its context is deeply local. And policymakers are often blamed, if I may, for regulatory fragmentation. But could it be that markets and customers themselves are driving this localization? And with the rise of what we call sovereign clouds and national encryption standards, customer choices around data sovereignty, trust, and control appear to be shaping the rules of the game. So given that trust, identity, and security may be defined differently in Washington, Brussels, or even Singapore, Is the very concept of global technology becoming a myth we need to move beyond? And can business realistically deliver solutions that respond to these deeply local expectations and requirements, even, if I may?
Just as Alison said, that's another loaded question. So, we could easily spend, I guess, half the day with dissecting that. I'll take much less time. Where do we start? When you look at what, I don't think that this is necessarily a new development. When you look at, where requirements, how they surface, they're always very, very specific to those, to the sovereign who articulates the requirements. And it's not been different with, working with customers very directly in certain industry segments, certainly not different when you look at customers articulating requirements in the commercial sector or in the public sector or, in regulated industries or in core governmental or even intelligence and defense segments. So requirements by their nature, are very much hyper-local, right, and hyper-specific. That is not to say that when you look at requirements, that there are not commonalities, right? And that when we look at the whole space, and we heard a lot about that in the first panel of the day, when we look at digital sovereignty in general, and I've been working for AWS for 5 years now. Before that, I used to be a department head within public service media, within the German public service media conglomerate, so the largest worldwide, responsible for all kinds of audience products and technologies. When you look at that, it starts with, when we talk about these requirements, it always starts with truly wrapping your arms around what those requirements and the domain looks like. And in the context of digital sovereignty, if I would ask you now, and all of you here, for instance, you're a very, very specific, highly informed subset of, of any audience you could potentially have, you coming here to Paris Cyber Summit. But still, if I would ask you for a definition of digital sovereignty that is easily articulatable, that many of you would align on, I think most of us would still, to this day, in the year 2026, have a hard time. I see that there is disagreement, and I'm sure that you will be able to share your thoughts on it. But what we've done there is, when something is as nuanced as that, what helps, with computer scientists like myself, what we end up doing is essentially subsystem decomposition. You break it down into the constituting parts, and then you look at what does it mean to different actors. And what you always realize, the more than probably 2,000 conversations I've had over the last 5 years working for AWS in the capacity that I'm in, it turns out that the first pillar always ends up being related to data protection and data privacy, right? Very much a legal perspective. And then the question ends up being, what else is there? And it turns out the second pillar ends up being around cybersecurity. And then you might ask yourself, well, if this is about data privacy and data protection, and on the other hand, if this is about cybersecurity too, what else is there? Is this just a communications issue? Is this, a different term to lump both of these domains together? Turns out, no, it's not. When it comes to data privacy and data protection, with many of the stakeholders that I deal with, it turns out that not only do our stakeholders then ask for certain guarantees around data locality, about data transfer transparency when it comes to, let's say, what we consider customer data, but that the claims, commitments, and transparency asks extend to customer metadata, right? So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is even more nuanced. Most of you are aware of different threat models when it comes to cybersecurity, and these threat models, when you think of them as a vector, right, they have different parameters in there. In the context of digital sovereignty, in the year 2026, no one truly doubts anymore that you can have a higher security posture if and when you build on global technology when it comes to being able to protect your infrastructure and your services against, let's say, ransomware, distributed denial of service attacks, organized crime, or cyber vandalism for that matter. So especially if your API endpoints are exposed to the internet, or your web apps are exposed to the internet. So everyone understands, having global visibility, having 9 million kilometers of fiber cabling distributed all over the globe, right? That comes and that brings a very, very high security posture. But in the context of digital sovereignty, in that threat model, something else becomes most important. Not only the things that I just recounted and enumerated, but rather operator access restrictions. So it turns out, well, I understand that I can protect myself and my workloads and my data best against any and everyone else. Can I protect myself against you as a potential threat actor too? Right? So let's be very candid about that. And then there is a third pillar, and then I'll be done with our understanding born out of all those, some single-day engagements, many of them multi-month, if not multi-year engagements, like with national cybersecurity certification agencies. The third pillar ends up being a different interpretation of resilience. Because if you look at resilience and global resilience, well, if I'd ask you, do you think that AWS is resilient? I mean, today I'm working for AWS, tomorrow I might be working somewhere else, right? But looking at this from a perspective of a technologist, of a CTO at many places before in my career, is AWS resilient? Yeah, 38 global regions, every single one a multi-billion-dollar investment, every single region built out of 3 so-called availability zones, not just 3 data centers, right? But an order of magnitude more, not just hundreds or thousands of servers, but hundreds of thousands of servers for resilience reasons. Is that resilient? Yes. But in the context of digital sovereignty, there ends up being a different interpretation of resilience too. And that ends up being, well, all of that meets so many of my requirements, but for certain workloads, I have a different interpretation of resilience. How are you catering to that? And that ends up being, what about potential kinetic disruption to, let's say, when we speak about a European perspective, what about kinetic threats to subsea cabling, to internet connectivity outside of the continental shelf of Europe? Or what about potential geopolitical disruption? So coming back to your question proper, I think it always needs that duality. Requirements being local have always been there. Regulation being local has always been a reality. Would we wish for more alignment? Is it good for our customers and us for things to be less fragmented? Yes, absolutely. But can we do without global technologies, and should we? Absolutely not.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this perfect transition. Now moving to Cristina, and we are discussing digital sovereignty. So discussion on digital sovereignty are ultimately as strong as the underlying capabilities that enable the concept in practice. So from your perspective and in the context of the Eurostack debate, where does Europe realistically stand today in terms of its digital capabilities?
Okay, thank you so much for this. I get frustrated when we hear that the definition of digital sovereignty isn't precise, isn't quite exact. We're splitting hair. Let's be blunt. We are in Paris, which is one of the pioneers, in fact, the pioneer of the idea of sovereignty. And let me speak as a European. What we've been beating about the bush is this idea that somehow this is about data location, this is about security, it's about resilience. It is about much more than that. We've also been talking this morning about regulation and how regulation, I come from the background of antitrust and regulation. I have been for 20 years in that tent, and I can tell you with absolute certainty and clarity that the entire fabrication of the European regulatory construct in digital has been a total failure. It has achieved an absolute fat zero. Europe tried and was a pioneer trying to take action against the digital platforms from 2010 and then pivoting to regulation. And each and every one of these actions has failed. But there's more. The problem we have had is that we had a massive blind spot. We deluded ourselves that by implementing this regulation, we somehow were going to build us a market. In what world? Regulating at the margin AWS or Microsoft or Apple or Google, for that matter, creates a cloud in Europe. Now imagine the situation is reversed, and one morning the radio in the United States says, fellow Americans, we have established that 90% of our digital infrastructure is owned by Europeans. What do you think Americans would say? Oh, let's do the DMA. Let's do the DSA. No, they would say, hell, what's going on? Why haven't we built a goddamn cloud or a software industry instead of tinkering at the margin with these platforms? So the entire European effort has been misdirected into regulation. I can't stand to hear the European Commission saying this morning, we were so fast. Good for you, good for us. That's delivered us a fabulous position. So Where we are today is that we are a digital colony, okay? Let's not beat about the bush. 80–90% of our infrastructure is owned by non-Europeans. And why does it matter? It matters because we are essentially systemically dependent on layers of infrastructure, hardware stack, software stack, control, authentication that we do not control. We have no agency on. That means our innovation is in these guardrails defined by someone else. But more than that, it means that our economic capability going forward are defined in a world of AI and digital by these actors. Our own industrial capabilities are limited by these actors. Our geopolitical leverage is defined by these actors. What are we talking about? We're talking about AI will free us. We will become suddenly sovereign in digital industrial AI. On whose stack? How deluded are we that we are going to actually become sovereign in industrial AI? Which platforms are going to deliver that industrial AI? Over there, Google, Microsoft. So let's not be delusional. What this is about is not security or resilience. I hate that language because resilience feels like, oh, we are just kind of getting a blow and we are just surviving. No, this is about growth. It is about value capture. If we don't capture the value of our business in digital, we are subjects. We are only ever going to build an extension on someone else's house. And I'll finally say, take what Mario Draghi says. I mean, every 5 years, the Commission commissions a report to a former Italian prime minister. You know, is it Mario Monti, is it Letta, is it Draghi saying to us, red flag, the European economic model is not sustainable. Why? Because we're being killed by China industrially, and we're bouncing off the American tariff wall. How exactly is our economic model going to transform itself if we don't take control of the means of production? So none of this is adversarial to American companies. I used to work for Amazon, for Apple, for Microsoft. I mean, I think they're very capable companies. I detest the language that we heard this morning from the Commission. Europe is a market. We are customers. Yes, great. So we are just the vassals. We are going to kiss your feet because we are the customers. No, we need to have power, capability, assets of our own, which doesn't mean we exclude American companies. Not at all. You can be here. You're welcome. But I want a bigger share of my market for me, for Europeans, because only that way we can create the dignity and the capability economically that we need. Europe is a superpower. Let's just not beat about the bush. When Mark Carney in Davos says pathetic things like, oh, let's all join hands, we are middle power. I think, no, you're a middle power, Canada. Go grow soybeans. We are Europe. We are a superpower. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. And I want to give you the opportunities to react because I think this is going to be a very lively discussion. I will open the floor to the audience a bit after that. But I think we agree on one point, at least, that Alison mentioned before, is that efforts are misdirected on both sides of the Atlantic and should go to technologies instead of regulations, maybe. Maybe you wanted to react, I will give you the floor, and if we can go the other way around, maybe Mustafa, if you had some points to make.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure we're talking about the same thing, right? I mean,
no, we're not.
Thank you. So I guess that settles it then. No, but where I don't agree is, you know, I don't think that talking about security, about resilience, is pathetic in any capacity. It's not. It's core. It's absolutely core to the customers that we work with. We're talking about BMW, we're talking about Siemens, we're talking about Capgemini 2, we're talking about a whole range, we're talking about Engie, right? We're talking about customers that exactly need that global footprint and that absolutely also need that security and resilience. It's not an either or. Without foundational capabilities along these lines, without a global perspective on what threats look like, without triple-digit billions of investment into continued resilience, security, features, and services, it's really, really, really tough to fulfill and achieve the type, and that's where we do agree, the type of leadership that Europe absolutely also deserves in the world and actually also fulfills. Let me give you another example there, because it very much sounded like this incredibly lopsided transatlantic relationship. Let me give you a very concrete and tangible example, and I'd be very happy about tangible examples too. SAP, for instance, is not a fringe actor, right? SAP is Europe's largest software developer, right? Also by market cap. Well, SAP also sells their software to whom? Well, to the Department of Defense in the US. How does SAP do that if these things are also lopsided? Well, there are regulations. We have the same, by the way, in every single member state within the EU. And the US has something that's called FOCI, the limitation of foreign ownership, control, and influence. So what does SAP do? Well, they found in order to, not transfer ownership, that's one mitigation mechanism. No, what they've done is introduce a different governance model in order to be able to cater to the needs, requirements, and regulations that the DoD requires. So that's, pick the search engine of your choice and just enter SAP NS2. That's the governance structure that SAP has built in the US to be able to cater to these markets. So I think, if I leave this part of my statement with one key message, then it ends up being the realm that we're in, the domain that we're all looking at very deeply, warrants, requires, and benefits from a nuanced perspective and looking at the details. This is where the details matter.
I wasn't saying that resilience and security are unimportant. I'm saying they matter too, but I'm saying from a European perspective, what matters most is growth. These things are important alongside. I don't think we can reduce the debate on sovereignty to one on resilience and security. That's the point. And I don't care that SAP is selling in America. So many companies do, Philips does, and Siemens does. This isn't the point. The point I'm thinking about is what capability Europeans have to serve their market. Whether SAP or Siemens sell in America, good luck to them. It's not my concern.
Maybe, Alison, you wanted to react to that, and a good point, especially on these regulations, are the fact and a good illustration that now we know nowadays that security goes beyond only resilience and technical aspects, and indeed, the question of the security of supply chains have been included in the NIS2 framework, for instance. So just building on that, but also on what has been said, Alison, did you have any comment?
Yeah, sure. So I love how candid we're able to be here, especially your perspective is very refreshing because I've not heard that before. And again, the operational piece, it's all about how are we able to create avenues where there can be greater interoperability, because right now there's not, and it's a challenge. So moving forward, I think what's going to be important for us as well is how can we remain open without being naive about the risk moving forward. I think that's always going to be a challenge, especially now, because things will accelerate. I do think that we're going to have to acknowledge that it's going to be tough tacos. I don't know how to say it any other way. That's just kind of how I explain it to my CEO. It's like if you want to be able to continue to have market capture and to grow and to be trusted, especially on your really bad days. Again, like that's where we really pride ourselves, is because you're facing nation state actors in your school system or your water treatment facility. It's going to continue to get really, really sporty. And I love the idea of Europe looking to be more competitive in this space and not being satisfied where they currently are today. And so delighted to be able to open it up to questions if we have any.
Yes, I think we will. So I will open the floor because I know that one of our speakers needs to leave in 15 minutes. So if you have any questions, please feel free.
We can continue to talk.
Or we could. No one.
Yeah, who's brave?
Okay. So if you wanted to react, Cristina.
Okay, I want to say one other thing, which is, in all of this, again, it is important to maintain perspective in one dimension. Again, none of what I say is intended to be adversarial towards American companies. I do not foster protectionism, autarky, decoupling. All of that language is not to be found in my pitch, because I think we will coexist and remain in Europe for a very long time, and these companies do a very good job. The problem is, why are we here? And why have we Europeans vacated a market and contented ourselves to become customers, happy customers, as we were told in the earlier panel? No, sorry, I'm not happy to be just a customer. I want to be a vendor. I want to be a doer alongside. So all of this is agency, is capability. It's what drives our future. So we have a tendency in Europe, and this is where I blame ourselves. It isn't a blame game, but I do feel it. We have a tendency to essentially practice learned helplessness. We have been infantilized as Europeans in looking up at the institutions. Every time I have this discussion, people say, very good point, Cristina, let's hope the Commission follows you. And I'm like, who cares? Who cares? They're the Commission. I don't care. I don't care about the institution. They're not going to have the speed, the capability, the competencies to drive the technology in Europe in the next 30 years. They're very well-meaning people. They're bureaucrats and lawyers, and they're not going to design the future of the European tech industry in DG Connect. Please, let's have reality checking here. Who is going to do that? It's got to be the private sector, the techie people, the business people who've got to come out and play. They've got to put their money where their mouth is, not continually admire the problem and diagnose. Because again, this morning I heard, well, if we had a single market, wouldn't it be lovely? Yes, if my grandmother had wheels, of course. But the point is, it's not going to happen in my lifetime. It's not going to happen. Let's be real. The Capital Markets Union is not going to happen. Why do we need the European Commission to do a scale-up fund? Well, like we don't have money in Europe. We have more money than God. We have 1.3 trillion euros a year in savings. The US, by the way, has 0.7. And what do we do with that 1.3 trillion in saving? We send 300 billion a year to the US, to VCs, to invest in American innovation. We're the only continent that complains it isn't growing, and yet it is sending 300 billion a year to the US. So exactly where are we in all of this? We have the capability of being much more than we are, and we are not pushing it. And it's on us. It's on us. Let's not look at the European Commission and say, why don't they do this? Forget it. These guys came into Europe in 2003, 4, 5, and rolled. And good for them. But where were we? We missed the bus. This is what I don't understand, and this is where we need to power up.
And just what would you suggest then if we don't have capital markets? One of my take would be maybe public procurement. Where would you
Public procurement is a portion of the total. It's 20% of IT spending, and it isn't going to move the dial, because even if you decide that a portion of public procurement is going to be somewhat directed to European products, we're still talking about 4% of the total, so it's not going to move the dial. It is the private sector that needs to wake up and put their money where their mouth is. Now, talking about nuances, it is absolutely clear that for certain user cases, the European offer isn't there. So if you are Mercedes and you're doing AI training or self-drive cars, you need a level of inference and compute that you can get from them or from Microsoft. That I accept. There is no alternative, which is immediate from European. But there are tons of user cases that are to do with banks and retailers and insurance companies and lots of businesses that do not need the level of inference and complexity that the most sophisticated one needs. And these need to move. These need to move because the offer is there, right? So that's the point.
If I may, I will try to find common ground here. And I think there is common ground. But what I do have a challenge with is the last part that you said, Cristina, and that is need to move. It needs to be choice-based, right? Who is supposed, exactly, who's mandating? And I think that's, if we truly want to, broaden the innovative capabilities and capacities in any and every dimension within Europe, well, what is a key interest of us too, and also of the customers, which are also, we have national cybersecurity certification agencies that are customers of AWS. It's not a secret, right? They deploy their production workloads for good reason on AWS. The NIS2 portal of Germany runs on AWS, for instance, for good reason. Now, when we look at these things, what needs to be possible, and I'm coming back to the very first question you asked, Clotilde, about, local rules, global technology. Let's keep this competitive. Let's keep this open. we will certainly never be happy with, and especially our customers won't be, is if there are, exclusionary measures to drive any type of innovation. That's not going to work. I'm not saying that you're saying it. Maybe this is our common
Let's
ground.
talk real. No one is saying there should be exclusionary measures. So can we put that out?
Oh, wonderful. Then that's settled. We solved it on this panel. Yes. But yes.
So that's propaganda. We are not saying that. You can't mandate the private sector to buy European. Who can do that? No one can. What you can do is tell the public sector, would you mind please buying 20% European? Public sector. Private sector, you can't tell them anything. So there's going to be no exclusion, no protectionism. Let's put that away.
Wonderful. There's not much to be added there. That's great.
We're in violent agreement.
We're in violent agreement on the panel.
So this is what you came for. There are no talking points. We're off script. We're being very candid. And I think that it is unique to this forum because, again, you spend a lot of time on the road as well. And you don't have that. So.
So does anyone dare to ask us a question now? No one can say that this...
So now we have the audience. Please. A mic is coming then, I think.
Good morning. Is it still EUISS. I'm from Latvia. Worked most of the last 3 years with Ukraine and in Ukraine. So I guess I have to be a brave one. As much as I don't want to bring this into competition discussion, but I think it is, and you are very fair in that. And I like, actually, let's talk practical cases. Let's not, it's kind of, we all are in agreement, but then we are not moving that needle. So a few cases, like cloud. We all struggle in Europe, we need European cloud. What happened with Gaia X and why it didn't work? I just wonder. Satellites. I think since war in Ukraine, we know that we need satellites. We know that Starlink is bad to have only Starlink. I mean, Starlink is great, but it's bad that there is no choice. Where are we missing? So we are not looking at Commission. I think we also agree that Commission is actually a representation of 27. So it goes back to capitals, and people are just trying to find common. I also work on cybersecurity. I work in Ukraine, but I also work with European companies in Europe. For example, with Secure, who is here and who will be speak. So what makes private sector in Europe to buy with Secure products versus American? Because you mentioned there are sectors where there is no alternative, like Starlink. We don't have alternative, or we don't have a cloud alternative good enough. But for example, on some products we have, but Europeans would choose American products if we go back, how to get back European market to European companies. So I wonder whether you have some concrete sort of steps, how can we get that private sector into European mindset?
And if I may, we just had another question, so we'll take the two so we have the time. It was up there, I think. It's Madam Ambassador.
Yeah, Heli Dirma-Klaar. I used to be Estonian cyber ambassador, and before that I set up the EU cyber policies, so I have the intimate knowledge of how the institutions work. And as Cristina said, I would think that we shouldn't really look up to the institutions, because the institutions are not going to provide the solution. And my question maybe to you, Cristina, and other Europeans on the panel mostly is that what are those structural conditions that should be met in order to have the European innovation and technology development to get unstuck? Because of the regulation and institutions, let's forget it, this is not helping. But we need to do more on the grassroots level, but what exactly is this more and how to do it?
So, do you want me to jump in? So, I mean, these are very good questions, and they're the questions that as Europeans, we really need to confront. We have not, as I continue to say, I do not blame American companies for having been good at what they were doing and occupying a market that was there. This is what anyone with any sense would do. The question is, we have been essentially stuck in this funnel. You remember the time when there were Vestager, Breton doing the bicep emoji, we're taming the American companies. And I remember thinking, but what does that do for Europe? Okay, you can nibble at the margin at Google. How does controlling Google search create us an industry? This is the incredible disconnect that we have lived through in the past 15 years. We spent a generation deluding ourselves. So what needs to happen now? I think the geopolitical environment inevitably helps because the reason we are where we are is that the companies that, AWS again, Google and Microsoft are extremely good at distribution. They have developed an incredibly good distribution channel with a very pervasive network of system integrators that partake in there. So it is a system which has essentially effectively occupied Europe. And of course, Europe has shrunk. Whatever assets we have become smaller. So what can reactivate this flywheel at the end of the day? I think it's going to be not all at once. It will take time. Procurement is an initial indication. If we are seeing what we are seeing, which is France and Germany beginning to buy European solutions instead of American ones in the public sector, it's not going to move the dial economically. They're small contracts, but it is giving a signal. But ultimately, what I do going around Europe is talking to companies and saying, there's no obligation to shift, but why don't you? Don't you realize that you are in a position of total dependency, that we collectively, as a continent, the thing that I find incredible is that Europe is amazing. We should not listen to this pessimistic narrative for a moment that, America's got all these billions. We heard it earlier. We have the trillion companies. We have the billions to throw at it. You poor little European, what can you hope to do? This is not the position. As I go around Stockholm and Copenhagen and Vienna and Warsaw and Milan and Paris and Vienna and Berlin and Amsterdam, we have the most incredible ecosystems in tech. We have incredible capability. We have absolute everything it takes. So we cannot continue to hide into, we are somewhat fragmented. Yes, all of that is true. But we need, ultimately, entrepreneurial spirit, agency. Who else is going to do it for us? Who's going to do it? The Commission? The institutions? It's got to be entrepreneurs who go on the road. If you're in Texas, you say, I've got this product. I'm going to see what Washington can do for me. No, you get in your truck and drive. So, this is what's missing. This sort of expectant position that we somehow need in this world for the Commission, the institution, to show the way. We saw them this morning. We should be happy campers. We're customers. I don't buy that, and I don't think we should accept it for 1 nanosecond. So what needs to happen? We need to wake up, but not just now, yesterday, the day before. Now it's time to just move. Just move. And we're not second to anyone. What are we waiting for?
I think that was quite a wake-up call. So the two questions were mainly addressed to Cristina, I think, but I wanted to give you the floor as well, Mustafa and Alison, if you wanted a final word for this roundtable, because we are running out of time right now, but we'd like to give you the opportunity to conclude on that. Thank you, Cristina, for this wake-up call.
All right, I'll be brief there. I think what remains important is it ends up being about choice, right? And it ends up about being able to compete in a merit-based manner. I think one of the questions was, for the Europeans on the panel, well, I might sound American, but I'm German, right? I have a graduate degree from Technical University of Munich. I was born and grew up in Germany. And constantly saying that companies like AWS are full-on American. Yes, US headquartered. Yes, founded in the US. Still publicly and globally traded, right? And then again, one key aspect about places, very specifically, let's speak about AWS. The core of AWS's bread and butter business, confidential compute, the Nitro hypervisor, for the geeks amongst us, are not being developed in Seattle, right? Those are products from Cape Town and mainly and led out of Dresden, Germany, right? So we have 5,000 engineers alone within EU member states working for AWS, right? We have hundreds of thousands of colleagues working for Amazon in total. So I'd be careful about saying, or limiting the perspective to saying this is American and there is no European component there, right? This is a fairly large 230 billion euro investment operation within EU member states.
And the profit gets shipped back.
So we're in violent agreement that we need more competition, and that I'm delighted to see what the Europeans will do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I think that's a wrap, guys.